Okay. Okay, Doctor, we got interrupted along the line, and I want to come back to this question once again. Given the vitriolic attacks, the accusation, but we are going to come there to see if you have some examples of accusation or lies peddled against you. Do you now consider the separatists, or as they call themselves now, Ambazonians, as your enemies, or a group of naive people fueled by disappointment and frustration?
No, I mean, so certainly they are not my enemies. They're not even my opponents. I am a fundamental believer in the democratic principle that you have to give everybody their own space, the freedom of expression. But what is more, I'm also a great believer and practitioner in the principle of the force of argument as opposed to the argument of force, which, by the way, we adopted in the 90s as the motto of the SCNC, the force of argument, not the argument of force. So I respect their choices, I respect their positions, even when I don't agree with them, as I don't agree with them, but I defend their right to pursue their own track, as I said a while ago. And so I see them as exercising the freedom to choose the path along which they want to walk, and therefore I don't consider them as enemies. And that is why none would give you a single example of where I have said anything derogatory, where I've attacked any of them personally, and so on. I have tried to demonstrate with argument based on fact and law, as I did in Atlanta on the 21st or 22nd of July 2017, as I've done elsewhere, that the path on which they are taking us will not lead us to the victory which they are promising, for the reasons that I state. So it's an argument based on reason. It's not on insult. It's not on calumny. It's not on throwing aspersions on people. I have never, I'm on record, if you like, go and search. You wouldn't find a single example where I, Simon Munzu, have said anything derogatory about any person, even one, in the separatist movement. And I only wish that they could act the same vis-a-vis the rest of us.
Good. You said you don't use aspersion, you don't use derogatory languages,
No.
but they use a lot against you.
Oh, yes, they do.
Do you have any kind of retentive memory
oh, yes,
to
they do.
have a litany of all the accusations and falsehood allegedly against you?
Yeah, I regret it. They use a lot of that against me. I mean, which is, but again, I say to myself, it's because they have no substantive argument to rebut my arguments. So when they fail to do that, they resort to personal attack and insult and so on. For example, I mean, their most favorite lie is that I owe my career in the United Nations to the Biya regime in Yaoundé.
And what do you say about that?
Nonsense, nonsense. I mean, because of my engagement in the Anglophone problem as co-convener of the AAC, as spokesperson of SCNC and all of that, I got to a point at the University of Yaoundé where I was teaching where I could no longer be under the authority of agents of the regime that was combating our aspiration for autonomy, which I championed, and still be a civil servant under their supervision. And so I had a choice, either to remain in the Cameroon civil service and shut my mouth, or to quit. And by the way, I was National Secretary for Economic and Social Affairs of the Central Committee of the ruling party, the CPDM. So from that vintage point, I could have said, okay, we made our effort, it didn't work, I retract, as many people would do and continue to do. But for me, it was a matter of principle. And so I opted rather to resign from the University of Yaoundé and the Cameroon Civil Service without any prospect of a job. And it was a whole year later that I got the opportunity through the UNDP office in Yaoundé to interview for the position of a United Nations volunteer. I would ask you, Ellie, go to the UN website even today. Go to www.unvolunteers.org and look at the process for joining the UN as a volunteer. And tell me where one's government intervenes in that. Now, having joined, and by the way...
Are you insinuating that you got to the UN through this volunteer trajectory?
Of course.
And not via the support of the government?
Of course not. I mean, in fact, I was going to say that's the bottom. It's the bottom of the heap in terms of consideration and salary, because you're not even a staff member, but that's the beauty of it. When you choose to be a UN volunteer, as the name suggests, you volunteer your time, and what you receive is a monthly living allowance. So you're not even UN staff. So, Mr. Ellis Smith, do you think that if the government of Cameroon, we're talking about someone who had my profile at the time, okay? I mean, what did I have? Almost 15 years of teaching at the University of Yaoundé. After what, in terms of educational qualification, a Cambridge PhD, a London LLM, a London LLB, having taught in the University of Yaoundé, ENAM, IRIC, École Nationale Supérieure de Police, the Police Higher College at University of Boya, and all of that. With a profile like that, having been National Secretary for Economic and Social Affairs of the Central Committee of the CPDM, with a profile like that, the government of Cameroon, looking for a job for me, will send me as a United Nations volunteer. Right? I keep telling Ambassador Fossong and Mr. Wilfred Tassang, who started this nonsense, did a story about me, that listen, if you guys were patriotic, you should be saying to young people in Cameroon who are aspiring to work for the United Nations, thinking that they will not go far because they won't get the support without the support of their government, you should be citing the case of Simon Munzu and say, look, this is someone who started as a UNV, but rose through the ranks, because again, I wasn't just catapulted to something, rose through the ranks from, once I got a professional contract as P4, I became P5, and I became a D1, I became a D2, I retired as a D2, before being called back to active service by the Secretary General to be offered the post of Deputy Special Representative of Secretary General in Côte d'Ivoire at the level of Assistant Secretary General. Now, all of that without I'm speaking and staring in your camera, in your eye, and through this, in the eye of the Cameroon government, and saying, without the government of my country even knowing where I was. So why are these Ambazonians so obsessed about Simon Munzu and his UN job?
Yes, and talking about his UN job, the rumor or the allegation being floated around is that you can't have the post of Deputy Secretary General of the UN if you don't have the support of the government of Cameroon, and that you got that simply because you betrayed the cause. But
as you say, that's a rumor, and that's of course that's the propaganda which the Ambazonians are putting out there very cheap and supported. I'm disappointed to say, supported by people like Ambassador Fossong, for whom at an interpersonal level I have tremendous respect. But I don't know what got into him, because I heard what he said in an interview that he granted Chris Anu before he became Secretary for Communication of one thing or the other, where he was saying, he even said that Munzu left them while we were on a trip, a UN trip for the cause of Ambazonia, of Southern Cameroon, that I left them, and our trip ended in June, and in September I got a job to represent. Go and check. He said to